All right, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Great to have you on.
Thank you. And I'll
Um,
never complain about having an Irish host because, I mean, number one, I'm actually an Irish citizen. I've never been there. My mother was
yeah,
born
you're
in Dublin.
saying that,
So
yeah.
I can claim that for everybody listening. But it's one of my favorite accents. So, and I think social media, especially, I've got a whole bunch of friends who are from somewhere in the UK, British Isles, Ireland, or Australians. And it's not all the same, but there's enough. North Americans are fucking fascinated with these accents. And so anybody who
Yeah.
does the video-based media with the accent, it just does super well. And I wish Danny Lennon, who's over in Ireland, would do more of these. Like my buddy Ben Mudge in Northern Ireland, which is not the fucking same thing at all, or Tom Morrison,
Mm.
both in Belfast. Like it plays really well. So you guys got to lean really hard on the accent.
Well, I come from the posh part of Dublin, so mine isn't probably quite as fascinating for people as something like Kerry or Donegal or Mayo
It
or something like that.
it depends because let's say you get in over into like England, like a lot of people, like you get the Cockney, the hard, really rough Cockney stuff that you see in some of the what's his name? God, why can't I remember his name? The guy Madonna married and ruined. Two Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch and all this sort of stuff.
Oh,
Guy Ritchie, Guy
Guy
Ritchie,
Ritchie, yeah, yeah.
Guy Ritchie, all the creeper movies, and so you see some of those. So, I think we kind of go for more of the suave, almost like Bond-esque. I mean, they've taken James Bonds from everywhere. Like there's an Irish Bond, right? Pierce Brosnan is Irish. In fact, I think only
Yeah.
two of the Bonds are actually born are English, and that's Roger Moore and Daniel Craig.
I was about to say
Because
Daniel Craig, yeah, yeah.
Connery is Scottish, and Timothy
Uh-huh.
Dalton, who's one of my favorites, is Welsh, and Lazenby's Australian. People
Uh-huh.
forget about George Lazenby. So yeah, so only two of the Bonds are English. We'll see what the next one is. We'll see if it's Tom Hardy or I kind of vote for Tom Hiddleston. And I know I've hijacked this and I'm totally side questing, but this is way more fun than the
Side
conversation.
quest away, yeah, yeah. Go for it.
All right, now I know you have main quest questions, so we'll see how bad I get on this
Well,
tangent.
we can side quest away, but maybe just a good place for anybody who happens to not know about you. It would be
Mhm.
interesting to know. Obviously you're a coach. How did you end up in coaching? How and why did you get into that?
I'm a fucking anomaly when it comes to the industry, and I'm probably going to swear, so I hope that's okay. You can bleep me out.
I swear
I
all the fucking
started
time on here, so you're good.
I started the industry at 32 years of age.
Okay.
I fell into this. I have a business degree, a Bachelor of Commerce degree from Memorial University of Newfoundland, where I'm originally from, which is very, similar culturally to Ireland, I'm sure, in some ways.
Yeah.
And I was always into sports and then got into resistance training, very bodybuilding-esque, although I was never in the competitive world, reading a lot of bodybuilding magazines, Muscle and Fitness, Flex, this sort of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Got really serious at 24, dabbled up that point, had a weight bench when I was younger. Um, really transformed my life at 24, put on a lot of muscle, really felt good about it. Then got kind of heavily into the bar scene. I owned a nightclub. That took me a bit
Oh.
off track. I moved across the country to Edmonton and kind of got resettled into the fitness world. And because of the interruption and like the party life will fuck with that. I promise you. Like those don't always work really well together. There are
Yeah.
a ton of reformed bar people who found their world way into the fitness world, right? So
I've
there's a lot of
encountered
real
many of
life,
them. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of real life practical stuff there. And I honestly think it can be a good foundation. You also tend to know a lot of people and you develop people skills along the way. So these are things that people forget, right? Not everybody, and all the power to the 19-year-old coach who wants to start out in the industry, but it's also tricky without that much life experience to relate to the 45-year-old woman who is perimenopausal. So you got a bit to learn along the way. So there's
Hmm.
advantages and disadvantages of this. So I digress. Sorry, I'm in that mode today.
Go for it.
So I think it's too much
Digress
caffeine.
away.
But anyway, so the gym I worked out at really wanted me to come be a trainer. I kept saying no, 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 until I finally said yes, felt totally overwhelmed, got a taste for it, got busy quickly, did really well with it, got deep into evidence-based strength and conditioning, nutrition, etc. I found resources like Dr. Lane Norton, T Nation, read a lot of T Nation, a lot of
Hmm.
the strength and conditioning coaches are there. Eventually found my way to Renaissance Periodization, Dr. Mike Israetel, and that of course led to Brad Schoenfeld and the other sort of like evidence-based figures in the industry. Put my head down, trained a lot for many years, worked for that company for 6 years, was the busiest trainer by total session volume in that company,
Hmm.
which I'm very proud of. And Eventually went out on my own, got out of the commercial gym space, contract to this day at a facility called Evolve Strength, which is more of a general and performance facility. And the owner is my partner in a conference as a recording, literally this weekend coming up. So we're
Okay.
great friends. And I've been there, God, it's creeping up on 8 years. And I started traveling within the industry. Me and a friend started a podcast, got deeply connected across the entire industry as a result of that. Started writing for my own website because I was inspired by all the T Nation stuff. And then through the podcast and industry connections, got invited to come write for T Nation, which was sort of a crazy dream come true a little over 5 years ago. And then it led to writing for True Coach, Generation Iron, then Muscle and Fitness Magazine, and eventually Men's Health, On It, Barbend, Kabuki Strength. There's a few more mixed in there. And so obviously you do all that sort of stuff. It kind of stands out in a career. So I do love the writing side. And then kept doing the podcast and then started complementing that with getting really serious about social media in 2019 and then leverage that into like surprising growth to the point where that helped deepen industry connections. Social media is not the be all end all. I don't think people should sleep on it. You've seen yourself how valuable it could be. That's how you found me. I'm virtually certain. And then
Yes.
people
Yeah.
look at the bio and go, wait a minute, this guy's written for all this stuff. That's actually credible. And that's, I think, a key to the formula. So any of the coaches listening, I really think if you can find ways to translate your knowledge, expertise, experience into long form media, whether it's writing for yourself, your YouTube, your podcast, etc., I think these are very high leverage vehicles. And if you can then turn around and take the smaller pieces and share it on social media in a way that like resonates with people, then you're going to attract a larger audience. And as the audience gets larger, more and more people start paying attention to you. It opens more doors. And that led to public speaking stuff, which is sort of nuts.
Yeah.
And now I look and I go, how the hell did all this happen? And I keep getting invited on podcasts by really generous people. So yeah, it's a weird path. I don't recommend anybody else try to follow that specific path, but I think there's a lot of valuable stuff in there.
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff in there that I want to hit on, but maybe to go back to part of the start of that story you were talking about. I'm interested. You were saying that you had a nightclub and then you decided that you were going to get into personal training. I'm interested about the part you were saying that you started and you got busy very quickly, and I think that a lot of personal trainers start off and they're quite lost about what to do to get clients.
Mm.
Some get lost in the social media thing. Some people decide to start working for a gym and doing classes first and then build a clientele through there. What do you think you did that was different to maybe some of the people who struggled for the first 2 or 3 years to even get like 5 or 10 clients?
Got really lucky. I mean, there's a lot of survivorship bias in this whole thing. And I would love to say, ooh, I had this intentionality going in. I didn't have a fucking clue what I was stepping into. Like
Sure.
it's easy to connect the dots going backwards. So I'll channel some Alex Hormozy wisdom here because Alex tends to take a general concepts and just frame them in ways that I think are really accessible. And if you go about the earliest part of your career, try to gain as much experience as possible. So where are the places where you can pay that tax, as he likes to put it? You have to learn, you have to get experience, and you will sacrifice earning potential. And yes, there are going to be some people who don't necessarily have the opportunity to like sacrifice. Cost of living is more expensive, but guess what? The flip side is if you don't gain that experience, you don't put yourself in a position to like see that like exponential curve take off the other way.
Yeah.
So I still am very bullish on going and working in a busy commercial gym space. I happen to be lucky that there was someone who sold a lot of training for us. This is also almost 14 years ago. It's a very different landscape, a lot less gyms, but there are gyms that I know of even today that get good volume and they have good programs where there's internal education that will teach you stuff. You have to learn sales skills. And I'm going to talk about used car sales type cliches, but actual like confidence in knowing that what you offer will help people and being able to confidently, ask people for business. So there are important aspects of sales that a lot of trainers are scared shitless of, but you better get uncomfortable and gain that experience early because that's going to be very high leverage. And the faster you can accumulate that, the faster you pay off that tax, the faster your career can grow. Or maybe I hate to say this, but like realize, okay, this isn't for me. I think if you get in an environment where you're a passionate trainer, but not great at the sales side of stuff, if you are seeing the volume and you're doing a really good job with your existing clientele and you get into a place where you can just focus on coaching, I think that can be a really good foundation. Then over time, you'll just get better at those other complementary skills. You may develop referral business really well. really, to be quite honest, I wasn't really great at selling cold. I never did that well. I retained clientele really well. I generated referral business really well, and that's what fed me.
Yeah.
So knowing even how to ask for referrals. And at the end of the day, if you want to do this and help people, you have to be able to confidently look at someone in the eyes and go, I can help you. I would love to work with you. And I like this, like even just the way to ask for business. Like so many people are so scared to ask for business. Like, hey, do you want to buy this? And then
Yeah.
someone offers an objection or says no, and then all of a sudden, oh, you relax, like, oh, pressure's off, and then okay, the discomfort goes away,
Yeah.
but then you're back in the same position where this person is not going to make a decision that's going to change your life that helps them, and you don't have the client, and sooner or later you keep doing that, and you keep like short-term relief, but like letting it's not about like pressure sales tactics or like fighting with every objection to the point where like you just won't let the person leave. I don't believe in that shit either. But if you are not confident, if you do not present confidence to the point where the person talks themselves out of something that they know that they need and you are qualified to help them with, they will leave. And one of a few things happen. One is they never come back and they never make the
Mm.
lifestyle change. And then they just keep going down the path that is unhealthy and is going to kill them faster, statistically on average.
Yeah.
Or B, on impulse, they walk into another fitness facility at a future date, but they end up in front of someone who isn't as qualified or as ethical. And that person does sell them because they are good at the sales side of things. And then
Mm.
they end up having a mediocre experience. It taints their experience, and then they still don't get the results they need. And then they suffer the same long-term consequences, but they also like squandered money in the process.
Yeah.
So there's a big incentive for coaches to actually get fucking comfortable asking for the business. And this is what I tell coaches: look at someone in the eye, smile, and say, I would love to have your business. That phrase is not hard to say, and then just shut up and smile at someone and let them do the talking. Okay. And oftentimes it's a non-threatening way of asking for the sale.
Yeah. Fully agree. And I think one of the great tragedies of the coaching industry is that so many of the best coaches that I've encountered who are technically really good and more importantly, really care about helping people, um, are so against any type of what they see as like greasy salesmanship. When it's really just what you're talking about, it's actually facilitating getting people the help they need. Because something I learned very early on is you can be an amazing coach, but to the average person, when they look around, everybody looks like maybe they could be a good coach. They don't have any way of disseminating. And so unless you're actively telling people, hey, I I have a business, I can help you get to where you want to be. I'm taking clients. I think if more coaches did that, they would be surprised the difference it would make to actually just actively go looking for people.
Yes, it's a completely limiting belief system. You're right. There are tons of really great qualified coaches who struggle with these things. And there's a perfect analogy here to social media because while it wasn't social media that got me started, before Instagram's a thing, I was posting the things I was writing. So it was like almost like a mini blog with
Mm,
Facebook. So I was very active on posting like a mini blog style on Facebook, which later translated into being able to write for my website or wanting to. But also I was posting video and things that my clients were doing, which was keeping me top of mind in my immediate network. I also would add and connect with people. If I met people socially, I would add them. And I didn't think about this stuff. Again, it's easy to connect the dots backward, but it works forward. If you have a bigger network of more people that are locally aware of who you are, especially if you're in-person client or online, it still works kind of the same way. And then people see these client successes. Then even those people you think are annoying who don't care about fitness, but they see you. Like they may not be interacting with you media, but then something changes in their world.
mm,
A friend of theirs asks, "Hey, I'm looking for a trainer." Someone in their family has a health scare. They themselves have something that happens, something flips, and all of a sudden, you're the person that they think of. So I really want people to stay top of mind by posting regularly. Your clientele and what they're already doing is a lot of idea stuff. You can just share that stuff, whether
mm,
it's Instagram or TikTok now. But at the time, I was doing it Facebook, and this brought me a lot of referral business over the years. And it's probably one of the keys to why I was able to stay as busy as I was, which kept me in a business to earn a good livelihood that allowed me to then put more pieces together that helped me grow and stay in this. And now, again, like I said, I look back and I'm like, oh, how the fuck did this all happen? But I think there's wisdom and I think there's survivorship bias.
yeah, and I think that Jonathan Goodman, who I think you know quite well, he talks about
Good
making
friend. I'll be picking him
yourself.
up from the airport on Thursday. He's one of my speakers at my event. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I'm a big fan of his podcast, and I've taken a lot of really good information away from that. And obviously he talks about the whole making yourself the obvious choice thing. But I think that there's a lot of really good analogies between training and the business side of training. And one thing he's mentioned before on his podcast is that you set yourself up in a position to be lucky by consistently doing all of the small things that you need to do, not in a sprint, every few months or so and then burning out, but just consistently doing it week in and week out, the same way it would work for training.
The surface area of luck, right? I like
Yeah.
the framing of that concept is yes, we can often look at where people are with, in terms of, hey, there's luck, but if you are not, and this is what you're clearly implying, if you do not put yourself in the rooms, virtually or literally, in the position somehow create have the skill set, like work on the skills to be able to benefit from opportunities when they arise,
Mm,
or when opportunities arise, lean very hard into acquiring the key skills, whether it's writing, podcast, public speaking. In my case, there's a few of those
yeah.
this is true of. But the more people that know who you are, the more visible you are via media. And I was going to take this further with social media. There are a lot of really skilled, really brilliant coaches out there who have very negative attitudes about social media. And
Mm,
they tend to straw man the worst grifters and charlatans and the idiots that walk through grocery store aisles and yell at breakfast cereal as
yeah.
representative of anybody who has a social media presence. We know there are tons of great evidence-based smart. Look at an Adam Meekins. I love his stuff. There are
Yes.
a
Yeah.
lot of people who are very smart, qualified, evidence-based. Danny Lennon for sure. Just so many, right?
Yeah.
And then there are the people who have done a really good job of taking fundamentally evidence-based stuff to the masses, whether it's a James Smith, who I think is probably the original guy behind the video-based formula in that space. And my buddy Steve Keen, right? Steve Craft Coaching. His media has exploded. Rachel
Mm,
Henley. They're some of the ones, with the accent that just plays super well, or my buddy Jack Hallows. There's a bunch of these. Josh Taylor is another one.
mm.
So they've done a really good job of fundamental principles in a formula, video-based formula that's really resonant. And there's so many of these coaches that are sleeping on social media or have these negative attitudes that, well, if I don't do it, then, I haven't tried, so therefore I can't fail. So that everybody who's done this thing is bad and lacks integrity. And it becomes a self-defeating narrative to stay in your little bubble. Well, I've got bad news for you. Let's say all of the people that were really the bad guys suddenly disappeared off the internet, were legislated and regulated off the internet. And quite frankly, if it ever got to that point, that's a world I don't want to live in, because that's kind of dystopian and horrifying, everything that would literally come with that. But
Mm.
we can't agree as an industry on all of the points of what is, quote, evidence-based. We have evidence-based authorities. I mean, Dr. Mike Israel is a friend of mine. I've spoken on stages with Lane Norton, and I think on the
Yeah.
average, those guys are really, really high standard. And you get like Menu Henselmans, who I don't know personally, but he posted this thing recently about
Squats and cardio.
squats and cardio.
Yeah, I
And
knew you're gonna go
here's what I'm
with
going
that.
to say. I didn't go anywhere
Yeah.
near it. I won't say a name. There's an individual who was one of the ones who like took the other side and ran with it, that I personally had a negative experience, and I, generally speaking, am not a big fan of,
Uh-huh.
because of just some shit that the way he behaved towards me. I just am not interested in dealing with him. And I think there were some people who actually went into the nuance. And then there were people who took it too far the other way and just playing, this fighting online.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm just not interested in playing those games. But more to the point, you have disagreement about something, like a study and interpretations of it, about people on both sides of this who are, generally speaking, very, very respected and reliable when it comes to scientific communication.
Mm.
If they can't fucking agree, who sets the standard of what is allowed online versus what is not?
Yeah.
Even in the unrealistic scenario, we somehow arrived at the point where we could police it to a degree. So the point is, it's never going away. We're never going to agree upon the standard. So, and even if we did, even in the unreasonably unlikely event that this happened, that the people that you think you're entitled to, because
Mm.
you think you are better than the influencers, they still won't know who you are. They will never find you, because you are not doing anything short form media based, long form media based, to gain that attention and work on that skill set. So they're not going to arrive at your door unless you do something actively, consistently, the compound effect of like just acting without expectation of a specific return. And just over the long run, it just seems to grow. Right.
Hmm.
And so I'm a big believer in take all this integrity and evidence-based skill set and learn another skill set. Learn the skill set of media, whether it's short form, long form. Show the world, help more people, give people more really good free information. And if you do that well, more people will show up at your door, and then you'll stop caring about what the influencers are doing, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because I think a lot of that stuff comes from a place of entitlement, of scarcity, and of status seeking. Well, guess what? Go and build authority and help more people, like reach more people. You will stop caring about, and I do believe it's valuable to fight misinformation. I think it's good to, the influencers are telling you to inject or drink piss, or I mean that's a real thing, or just some of the other
Yeah.
just pure charlatanic nonsense. The con men
Mm.
who are masquerading as health and wellness people out there, right?
Hmm.
Some of this stuff it's astonishingly bad. And sure, they're fooling everyday people. Okay. We definitely want to educate more people to help more people. We have to be more entertaining and more effective in our communications to help those people. And there's some people like Dr. Joey Munoz, who I think does a wonderful job. Dr. Ids, I think it's pronounced Ids. He's in the UK.
Hmm.
I think Norton still does a really great job of this stuff. There's James Smith always did a pretty darn good job of this stuff. There's
Yeah.
many others who will take the piss out of and laugh at the grifters and the charlatans.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also think they all, on the average, also share a lot of really valuable information on their own. They're the ones who are building audiences and changing the industry and helping more people, right? The people who are sitting on the sidelines crying about what people are doing without actually actively helping. I
Yeah.
just don't, I don't listen to those people. Now, that was a bit of a tangent, but I feel passionate about it.
As do I. And I think when I first, well, I posted on social media for a long time without getting any kind of traction outside a few hundred followers. And I think I noticed at one point when I started talking more about, misinformation, pointing out charlatans, grifters, etc., it definitely does spark a lot more engagement with people. I think there's also a bit of an entertainment factor to it as well, because people enjoy seeing these kind of like vicious debates about stuff. But as you've indicated, I think all the people who are kind of seen as thought leaders in the industry, they do more than just that. And I've tried to do more than that with my own social media as well, because at a certain point, I think you can't just keep pointing out what's wrong. You have to actually share something of value that people can actually put into use. And I think somebody who does a really good job of that and has really kind of nailed it recently with meeting people with where they're at is Mike Israetel. I'm sure you've seen
Totally.
like, yeah, the YouTube videos he's done where it's like looking at an NFL player's workout, but it's not just bashing like this is nonsense. It's like, here's where this could be improved and going through what a better approach might look like.
Well, Mike came to mind here too. So several points about Mike and Renaissance periodization. Number one, his wife, Crystal Guevara, who's amazing. She's a doctor and really, really smart when it comes to a lot of things, recovery training stuff.
Mm,
Definitely one of my favorite resources on like Ozempic and GLP-1 agonist. She's going to do a talk. So she's flying in. I'll be picking her up at the airport on Thursday, and she's flying in to speak at my event second year in a row. Now, the RP team, they're great. Nick Shaw was just texting me. We're going to get on a call tomorrow. He's Mike's partner. But Mike, who I met in 2017, I've had dinner with him with the RP crew a few times at different events. They've come up to Alberta a bunch. Mike was actually one of the ones that helped kickstart my social media growth in early 2020. He kept taking my posts and sharing them on his wall and tagging me, and would drive hundreds of followers my way.
I think that actually
Mike's
might have been
amazing.
how I found your stuff, to be
I
honest.
wouldn't be shocked. And then, I mean, I've got a bunch of the RP books on my shelf here, like what recovery from training, scientific principles of hypertrophy training. I've got the Renaissance Diet 2.0. I got three
Mm,
of their books. I mean,
yeah.
they've been creating as a group. They've been going around teaching at seminars all over the world. They A lot of books, a lot of media, and they've been doing the YouTube stuff for a really long time. More recently, this stuff just took off like a rocket.
Yeah.
And I know that he's been working with Chris Williamson a lot. There's a lot of like feedback and input from Chris and his insights into growing and they are shooting through the moon. And I was walking around with the Renaissance periodization crew, Mike, Nick, and everybody at the Olympia last year,
Hmm.
and they go there every year. And Mike couldn't take 10 steps before people would like come up and start talking to him. And I mean, like I walked past numerous fairly well-known figures in the industry, former Mr. Olympias, whatever. Like Jay Cutler obviously had a massive line to see him. Phil Heath had a massive line to see him. Mike O'Hearn did, Hafthor Bjornsson. Like they had monstrous lines.
Yeah.
But quite frank, and then when Mike turned around and had like a station, it was lined up just as much. Mike is becoming of that level of like influence and popularity in the industry right now. And this is what we need is, yeah, okay, someone might not be happy the fact that Mike reshared Menu's post about his interpretation of the cardio and squats thing. Okay, cool. We're majoring in the minor. And even if you don't agree with, I don't agree with 100% of the stuff that Mike says or the other people that I openly endorse and love. Like, I think we have to get over that. Like, oh, this person said this like thing I don't agree with. Oh, like we have to cancel them now. Like they're no good as a resource anymore. I don't
Yeah.
agree with belief systems of most of my closest friends that I trust most in this world. Why are we like getting so twisted and like clout chasing over like a minor disagreement in interpretation with someone who has a verifiable track record of being really reliable as a resource, right? And
Mm.
that's one of the reasons why I think that whole dust up over that cardio thing was a little overblown.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Mike, to your point, has for a very long time, they just built a massive library of cheap or free resources to help more people, right?
Hmm.
And now, years later, he's always been well known and had a great following. They're seeing now that exponential growth curve because their YouTube is just working super well, right?
Yeah.
But that took years to get there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember it's great to see as someone who's been subscribed to that YouTube channel for so long because I remember maybe back in like somewhere in 2013 or 14 or something like that, watching videos of him literally just standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation in a classroom, um, going through some stuff about like the science of hypertrophy, and now to see him in a position where he's getting onto major podcasts with that guy Chris Williamson. Honestly, I wouldn't be blown away with surprise if he got onto something like Joe Rogan with how big that he's getting. Um,
I'd be shocked if he doesn't. I mean, the pace and the trajectory. I mean, what the thing that works about Mike is sort of a perfect storm too, is he may be he's one of the most articulate and intelligent people in the industry, whether you agree with every single fucking thing he says or not. He's super fucking smart. But
mm,
he's also incredibly funny. I do not believe there's actually a funnier individual. Like he has like listening to him talk about advanced hypertrophy principles. It's
yeah,
comedy. It's still better than most stand-up comics, right?
yeah,
You will
I've
be
I've laughed
laughing.
out loud in some of those videos he's done. Yeah,
Yeah. And you listen to Chris Williamson. So as I said, Nick Shaw's a good friend. And so one of the things Nick will say is for a while, they would try to like rein Mike's like true nature and humor in a little bit, some of the more risque stuff he'll say. And try to maybe appeal a bit more broadly, but they're like, fuck this. Like we own like the word hypertrophy. They really wanted a brand in that space because the people who know what the word hypertrophy means will self-select to kind of gravitate to that, right?
yeah,
And but I honestly think the way that Mike is as a science communicator is actually getting way more mainstream. And I think that's working, especially with platforming by people like Chris Williamson. But I think it's Mike's humor and his delivery that makes him relatable. And then he can weave in all of and he modulates the way he communicates, the language he uses, depending on his audience. He's very good at that.
yeah,
He's very different on a lecture in person with a bunch of people who've self-selected to attend RP stuff versus what he is on Williamson's stage. So I think there's a lot you can learn about the way that Mike and RP have done, even if no one can replicate Mike's humor.
hmm. No, he's definitely very unique in terms of the skills that he's able to pull together, and I think it's a possibly like a really positive sign of where the fitness industry is headed, and that somebody who's talking on that level of nuance and science can get that popular. Do you think, compared to when you started in the fitness industry to now, do you think in general the average information people are getting fed is better? Has it stayed the
Absolutely.
same? Has social media made it worse?
I mean, social media is going to platform the good and the bad, right? Do I think on average the the average person is more knowledgeable. I have to believe so. I think it has improved. I think the average person has a lot more access to good. I think that the grifters have also gotten better at reaching larger audiences. Again, this whole format, just walk through a grocery store aisle, pick out something that either is complete. There's one Muppet, I don't even know his name, and I see his videos. People make fun of him, and it's like he grabs the unhealthiest thing possible. He's like, talk about Halo Top ice cream and chocolate bars and shit. And he's like, did you know this is like, it's like, motherfucker, no one thinks that's health food.
Yeah.
Seriously, like, no one is confused about this.
Yeah.
And let kids have their fucking chocolate bars. Now, yes, on a societal level, do we know that people are consuming way too much ultra processed food? Everybody knows this. The people eating it
Hmm.
fucking understand this. The socio demographics of like access to some of this food in certain places is part of the problem. The fact that some of these things are subsidized by the government to like make it like subsidizing high fructose corn syrup. You can whip out all the studies you want about like, oh, high fructose corn syrup's not bad. Guess what? An overabundance of this shit is a problem. It's very easy to get access to. It's cheap. It's in a lot of things. People consume too much of it. Our dopamine and hormonal like appetite signaling is probably wrecked at a societal level. Those things are all true.
Sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, like telling people, chasing clout by saying, ooh, look, this ice cream is bad for you. I mean, that's not the problem. Like, I have a Dairy Queen Blizzard once a week. And this is literally like, I have an article on this on my website. If someone wants like my philosophies on nutrition, I think we need to realize that one, most of the food that we like cook, and again, people being able to have the time, the narratives around like time to cook and access, whatever, that's relevant, but we can get around that. A lot of the home cooked stuff that we have actually is really damn good. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I really like that I can cook at home. I
Hmm.
have oatmeal with like flavored protein powder and eggs and a orange and black coffee every morning. I fucking love it. I eat it every day. I love it. It's wonderful. Okay. I don't need Fruit Loops anymore.
I'm a huge fan of what we would call it porridge here.
Yeah. Right. I grew up with
Yeah.
porridge. This is what we used to call
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Porridge in rural Newfoundland. Mom and dad would feed us. Like we had porridge every morning. Like mom and dad were way ahead of the curve. I'm very lucky. I
Mm.
grew up in an environment where, whether they realized or not, they got us involved in sports very young, encouraged, cooked a lot of home meals. And then on Fridays, I was allowed to have, $5 at the time would get you a bag of chips and a can of drink and a couple of chocolate bars, right? That's a long time ago, right? I'm 40.
Long
So
gone are those days.
that's a long time ago. But I also was lucky that I had this good boundary where, okay, this stuff was allowed, just a healthy ratio of when you had it and how much you had. I think that's broken in a lot of places, sure, and I'm not judgmental about it.
Mm.
So let's get people back to it and recognize, okay, most of the home cooked stuff is nutritious, healthy, lots of protein, lots of fruit, veggies, whatever. Like, great, enjoy that stuff. Take a look at, all right, what is all the mediocre, high calorie crap that we just actually don't like? It's not as good as the first thing. Recognize that we're eating it because it's more convenient, and quite frankly, sometimes, not always, sometimes we're being a bit lazy about it. Let's set a better boundary around, preparing large piles of meals, and let's just mercilessly get rid of the mediocre shit that we're spending money and calories on. It doesn't even make us feel good. We feel terrible. We don't feel
Hmm.
good about it. We feel shame, a lot of guilt. And then there's the third cluster, the things that we truly treasure. And you can't treasure all of the second thing. Most of it's garbage. We don't like it. We don't feel good.
Yeah.
It's mediocre. We're lying to ourselves. We think it's good, right? Most fast food. And then look at the bucket three. Like maybe you really love cheesecake, or like for me, it's a Dairy Queen Blizzard Reese peanut butter. I love them. They're wonderful. I don't feel good if I have 4 or 5 of them a week. I've tried that. It doesn't work. It's too many calories. It doesn't, and you don't treasure it. But once a week, I will have a medium one, and I will sit quietly, tune the world out after a leg workout, and
Hmm.
it feels great. I can enjoy it. I don't feel awful afterwards. And I've created a boundary around it where I can enjoy it without shame. And there's the key. Because if you eat a lot of the mediocre rubbish, guess what you still want? The really good stuff. So
Hmm.
what do? You go eat the good stuff. And now you're in a very hypocaloric environment. You're not feeling good. And you feel guilt or shame, but enjoying the thing that really matters. Cut out the garbage, the stuff you don't enjoy. Be fucking merciless with it. And it helps when you realize that actually I like the home cooked stuff more. Let's put some
Yeah.
effort into the home cooked stuff. And then it creates space for the things that, hey, this is a treat that I treasure. And if we can keep that, guess what? We can achieve a balance where you don't feel restricted and deprived because there's room. And yeah, okay, if you apply like calorie tracking or just habit-based stuff, either way, I think this framework can improve your average person struggling, their nutrition, their mindset, and their actions.
Yeah. I've found that to be the same for myself with obviously with people I work with and my own nutrition. The mindset I try to take is that if something isn't going to be like a 10 out of 10 treat in my mind, it's basically a 1 out of 10 because it's just giving me
Yeah.
calories that I don't need and I'm not going to appreciate it. Whereas, I love chocolate. For me, having we have a chocolate bar here called Yorkie. I don't think they would have it in Canada.
Familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like in
It,
Canada, we have Smarties, but the Americans don't know what the hell Smarties are.
oh yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so Yorkie is just solid milk chocolate, which is what I like. And I'll have two or three of those in a week because I really like them. But I realized a few years ago, number one, I can't have them in the house because I'll eat two or three every day. And number two, that also means that I don't really care about stuff like crisps or drinks like Coke and stuff like that. I can very easily cut that out of my diet and not care. Even ice cream as well. It's not a big one for me. But chocolate, if I didn't have that in my life, fairly regularly, I'd be miserable.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. I think if you try to deprive yourself of everything that brings you joy, it's like I put up a post about alcohol today, and that gets people crazy. It's like,
Mm,
yes, I know it's literal poison. I know there's literally no like good anything about it, like technically from a molecular biochemical standpoint.
mhm.
And I think that there are a lot of people that have a broken relationship with it that really should never drink. Whether you are
Absolutely,
already
yeah.
there or need to address that, you have to get very clear on that. There are a portion of the population that should never fucking touch this stuff because on a societal level, alcohol brings a lot of bad.
Hmm.
But preaching that everybody needs to get rid of it because it's literal poison misses a bit of nuance. There will be a subsection of the population that can handle it very well in moderation, drink it responsibly. And while I do not believe that you should need alcohol to enjoy social situations, I think that's a dangerous thing to make, to have equated. But there are going to be a lot of scenarios where if you can go into that scenario and you want to have a beer or two, or a glass of wine, or a really good glass of scotch. I like really good Highland single malt scotch. And if you can enjoy that responsibly in a social setting, and sometimes you don't drink. Like I was at a housewarming recently. I was at two Metallica concerts. I didn't drink anything. I haven't had a drink in a month. And I used to drink a lot when I was younger, and now I don't drink very much. So it's matured over time. It just doesn't feel as good, right? That's my own personal relationship with it, but I'm not going to get preachy with what everybody else should do. But I think that, well, all the research that for a very long time, there was this belief that there was this benefit to moderate drinking, right?
Yeah.
Especially people thought with like resveratrol
Resveratrol. Yeah.
and red wine. And
Hmm.
we now know that that's all nonsense. There's literally no benefit whatsoever. But what was masking everything was overwhelming. Like I think the main interpretation is the the benefits of the social, uh like not being lonely, not being isolated,
Hmm.
outweighed in the environments that people were in for the moderate social drinkers, outweighed on a health benefit the negative effects of moderate drinking. I mean, once you get into extreme levels of drinking, then the health detriments are really, really catastrophic, and no amount of social can offset it. But we're also understanding that like isolation and loneliness, like force, like solitude of your own choosing is very different from like isolation and loneliness that's not
Yeah.
really of your own choosing. Those things are, I mean, I don't like hyperbole like this, but I do believe that they sort of have a similar mortality risk of a quality of life risk of, maybe not quality of life, but certainly mortality of like smoking. And that's a very bold
Mm.
statement. Again, like I said, I don't like that kind of hyperbole, but I think that's at least in the ballpark. So, and that's really fucking bad. So if some of your positives in your life involve a good relationship around some social drinking, I'm just not interested in this message that everybody needs to like 100% quit alcohol. It's nothing but poison. It's like, get off the high horse, and like sometimes there's nuance there. There's also
Yeah.
some social demographic aspects to it too, like your income level and your family environment, and like some of that sort of stuff
Hmm.
probably, that stuff does have statistical influence on health outcomes. So there also is probably a relationship there too with like your relationship with alcohol. But then we're starting to get into complexities that just go beyond the scope of this.
Totally. I mean, I think a large part of it is stress relief too. I've always said that I think ironically the people who obsess over all the biohacking stuff and trying to optimize every tiny possible little micro percentage of their nutrition and fitness probably counteract that with the amount of stress they've created overthinking all of that stuff.
Let's take that further because there's something here. And let's look at the sleep aspect of that. So you get people who have these big rituals around all of the sleep optimization, sleep hygiene,
Hmm.
and or any of these like elaborate morning things. Oh, I got to do my meditation or like cold plunge, and it's got to be in this specific order, and then you do go heat and then cold or whatever. So let's say you create this complex system that emotionally you rely upon as a set of rituals to be able to function and like not experience stress, to be kind of optimal. Well, what happens when you don't have access to those things, when life gets like when you're traveling?
Mm.
Okay, let's say you have this. Let's use a sleep one. That's easier. All right, so you're traveling. So you don't have all of your elaborate sleep setup, your custom bed and blanket and cooling, whatever the fuck apparatus, and you don't have blackout curtains in there, and you're in a hotel room, or you got someone sleeping over, whatever the fuck is like change about your environment. You don't go to bed the same time. Then it will cause stress and disruption to your ritual that it will interfere with your ability to fall asleep, your quality of
Hmm.
sleep, and
Yeah.
you're actually worse off. You've created so many complex pieces that if you remove any one of those pieces, it will introduce more stress, interfere with your ritual. And you don't, not only do you not gain the supposed benefits of your ritual, but you've now actually like set yourself off the other way. So I just think that people are good at, if we go too far down this optimization rabbit hole, I mean, Huberman and other people are popularizing, then I think you actually make yourself very fragile. And that's the problem. I think we need to be robust and anti-fragile to the point where
Yeah.
I want someone to be able to fall asleep in almost any environment. To be able to fall asleep on a plane or, in a hotel room. And if you make your rituals really complex, it makes it very hard for you to do those things in different environments where you
Mm.
cannot engage in ritual.
I was literally about to say this, but I assume you've read the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb.
One of my favorites. So, I
Yeah.
mean, Nassim Taleb is a pompous ass who holds some very unscientific beliefs about GMOs and other sort of things, right? So,
Hmm.
don't, you know what? I'm going to give you guys a piece of advice. Do not follow your favorite authors on Twitter. There are a
Funny enough, do you
lot
know
of,
he does Starting Strength and he's friends with Mark Ripito?
well, I mean, we know that starting strength has its pros and cons too, right?
It has its
So,
limitations and dogmas. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like fundamental wisdom and a lot of like unscientific dogma that permeates a lot of these
I've
things.
always said that if 90% of beginners started with Starting Strength, they would be doing really
Amazing.
well and then just do something else as soon as you're done with that beginner stage.
Amazing. I think there's
Yeah.
so much good in there. Nothing like, again, it's like you're not going to agree with 100% of what anybody's saying. Like, so if you go into like a lot of authors I really like I like their books, and you get a dose of their like Twitter, their social media, especially if they like are interested in politics at all, they're loud of
Mm.
politics. Sweet mother of God, just don't do it. Ignore them. But Taleb, like, brilliant ideas. I think Anti-Fragile is probably one of the most important books anybody can read. It gets a bit dense at times, but its concepts, I just think it's going to equip you for a more robust mindset about how to navigate life. I love the concept. His other books are great. He does like to write in a way that he likes to make sure that he forces upon you that he is smarter than you are, right? I think he's a totally pompous jackass. I happen to
Yeah.
like his writing. And those two things can be true. And I think there's too many people who it's like, oh, I don't like this singular belief about this person. Therefore, I have to discard everything
Mm.
about them, right?
Yeah.
And I don't like, I hate political stuff, complex social ideological stuff, but it's this sort of person who will like black out a Harry Potter tattoo because they don't like what J.K. Rowling is saying on Twitter. And that's all I'm saying on
Sure.
that. I'm not going to hear that otherwise.
We
Right?
won't rustle the yeah.
Just, you know what? Enjoy fucking Harry Potter for real,
Yeah.
okay? Yeah.
It's a very good book. I read it when I was 6 years old. I got into that, but yeah, I think that there's a lot in Anti-Fragile that I mean I heard and he discusses it in the book before about sometimes the most room for advancements in a field is actually when you take something from another field that is
Hmm.
thinking outside the box. And I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of room in the fitness space to take some of the concepts in Anti-Fragile, kind of like you were talking about the sleep thing there, where there's this massive fascination on making everything ultra efficient and optimal as opposed to trying to build resiliency and adaptability. so that when you are thrust into situations where you're not going to have a perfect sleep schedule, a perfect food schedule, um, being able to integrate that more into the fitness space is something that I've tried to do and seen a lot of success with. And yeah, Anti-Fragile, I think, is a fantastic book for that.
We're seeing this in the biomechanics world too when it comes
Mm,
to social media. I mean, I call it TikTok biomechanics because I think there's a lot to learn, but you have a lot of rubbish as well. And you
yeah.
get people and like, guess what? I think a single arm cable row is a fucking fantastic tool, right?
Love
Not
it.
everything needs to be a single arm cable exercise where, it's, oh my God, like the fiber orientation. It's like there's truth in fiber orientation. That stuff's fairly valid. My favorite for this, if you dive into Jordan Shallow and Prescript stuff, like that whole course, I did level one. I think it's great. Jordan's media is funny nuance. Sometimes he's like kind of blunt about the way he says things, but Jordan preaches nuance. He will tell you that, okay, like understand these principles, understand like lengthen position, shorten position, mid-range position of like loading muscles and how to orient your body and like use a variety of exercises that will train shorten position, lengthen position. Like that stuff's sort of complex, but
Mm,
if you've ever heard this stuff, it's valid, but it can't be the black and white guiding star that is the only thing you take into consideration. And when I see people on social media getting deep into this optimization stuff, then I'm like, you've never coached a real person. Like I worked with
yeah.
general population clients full time for 14 years. Okay. I saw something recently by, I'm not naming names, an individual I like, who I've sat down and had dinner with, who I think is very smart, was posted something very negative about farmers carries, right?
Hmm.
And there's and it's like one of my clients, Larry, I post video of him doing farmers carries all the time. And well, let's break down farmers carries. Do they have a fairly high fatigue ratio to effort? Yeah, actually they kind of do. But I mean, people also need to, and again, is it optimal for energy system development? Probably not. You're still getting, stamina from it.
Hmm.
You have a weak point where you're going to be limited by your ability to grip something. So therefore, does it take the other muscles through ranges of motion, a lot of tension to failure? Not really, actually. But guess
Yeah.
what? You've got someone doing some fairly hard work that will build physical and mental resilience. It's a great grip strength exercise. I think it's actually great for postural strength. I think for reasonably deconditioned people or the general population that like don't love training to begin with, and you give them something cool that they feel strong at, like a heavy farmer's carry, guess what? I think those things are massively net positive. And I'm not really interested in well, this exercise has this particular problem.
Sure.
Uh, but at the same time, let's flip it. Let's say like you got a dumbbell fly. Okay, here's another concept I think is valuable for coaches to know is the difference between it. How does the your strength curve through a motion match with the resistance profile of an exercise? And I love using a dumbbell fly as an illustration. So if
Mm,
you think about it, everybody listening, think about the position of a dumbbell fly. At the bottom, your arms are out wide. We know it's really super fucking hard, like really, really hard, right? That's the weight that is going to limit your loading. Everywhere inside of that, it gets easier and easier and easier. At the very
hmm.
top, what's the resistance profile? The resistance profile is gravitational, it's vertical, and but it's stacked through our arms. There's no tension on our target, which is our pecs, right? That's
Yep.
where we're strongest, but the exercise is easiest. And where are we weakest? At the point where the exercise is the hardest, which is wide out. So it's got a total mismatch of strength curve to resistance profile. In this
Yep.
particular case, I think it's a mediocre exercise where I would rather have someone do a pec deck fly or a cable fly. I think they're way better, or just press. I actually think dumbbell pressing is just simply way better than dumbbell flies. But guess what? I also have a client who has a home gym and limited equipment. He does his pressing,
Sure.
he does dumbbell, etc. Guess what? He likes a bit of variety. I just make sure he's not going too crazy with the load, and I let him do dumbbell flies. That's okay. So it's not as black and white as this optimization makes it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem, a lot of these conversations take place on social media, which in itself is not, a platform like this where we're having a conversation and we can flesh things out. I think oftentimes people are talking past each other on this stuff without
Yeah.
realizing, and that it's somebody who trains intermediates or maybe even very good athletes who maybe does have the ability to like really get into the weeds of like how to fully optimize things and can like get into the pros and cons of a farmer's carry and stuff like that, and doesn't need to think about needing to motivate somebody because they're working with people who are naturally motivated. And this is one of the problems that I have sometimes with like, I'm sure you get this all the time. I don't know if you do Q&As on Instagram or in general, but like I'll get
Sometimes, and I need to do them more because they're good. I need to
they
do them more.
I really enjoy them, but I think part of the problem is that people don't know how to ask questions in a way that will serve them. And like by that I mean people will ask questions like thoughts on farmers carries, which really is asking like what is like how do I use farmers carries with the people that I work with? Not is farmers carries a good thing for you in your specific situation, which I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what lends those kind of questions lend themselves to people coming out with hot takes about, well, they're crap because I don't use them.
Yeah. I have a 75-year-old client who is, came to me several months ago. Daughter found my social media. She's lovely. She needed to get back into the gym. She'd worked with a trainer before that I knew, and he's retired. And she had another knee replacement. So she's deconditioned, and that knee has got it's probably a little fibrotic in terms of like true
mm,
strength through range of motion. And guess what? I get her to do farmer's carries. I
yeah.
think that it's a really good exercise for her. She really likes them. And what else have I got her doing? Like we start out with a very, very like limited range of motion box squat because
Hmm.
that's all that she could, that's the only range of motion she was actively able to control.
Yeah.
And so then when I move on to, I have her holding a TRX, squatting to a box that's lower, it gives her more range of motion. And we're focusing on like controlling through the negative part. And then she's
Hmm.
like using her upper body to pull herself back up again. It's just adapting stuff that fits to this person's like unique situation. And if
Mm,
I subscribe to this, like, oh no, farmers carries like they aren't optimal. Guess what? They're fucking fantastic for this particular client. She really likes it. And the fact that she
yeah.
likes coming back, that has a very big influence on whether or not her training is effective. And she's
Yeah.
visibly getting like
Yeah.
she's getting way stronger. So that's far more important to me. But I think you can't also discard these principles. You also have to understand them. Like each time I use the example, I try to actually explain the nuance to my interpretation of it.
Hmm.
So I'm armed with that. And there's a lot of situations where I will actually program, quote, optimally because it suits the client. But when you're dealing with real people, like as
Yes.
opposed to
Yeah.
abstract straw man concepts on social media, I think just be very careful about getting too dogmatic with your training. And when
Yeah.
people say dogmatic things on the internet, I think you also recognize, okay, cool, they're playing to an audience. They're
Hmm.
looking for clicks. And sometimes they're looking for, I mean, it's bait. It's like the Tom Hardy meme from um
Mad
the
Max,
GIF
that's base.
from Mad Max, where he's like shaking his fingers, like,
Yeah, I
that's
use that a
bait.
lot. Yeah, it's good.
And guess what? You don't always have to take the bait on this sort of
No,
stuff
no.
as a coach, right? And honestly, I think one of the lowest value activities that you can possibly do as a coach, and I've made a grand assumption here that a lot of your audience are coaches. I think so.
A lot of
Um,
them, yeah. A lot of
is
them, yeah.
is getting drawn into arguments on the internet over differences of interpretation of evidence or ideology.
Absolutely.
And I sometimes see this stuff, and when I see dog piles with this sort of stuff, I usually am kind of a little bit wary. It's also why I engage with my media the way I do, is I'm not interested in like these hardened camps. And I guess I've been lucky as I've been able to like exist within and navigate. And I sort of alluded to earlier, like I sort of like see you as being part of this really smart, very evidence-based community of strength coaches. There's a lot of physical therapists and chiros in there. And honestly, I learned so much from these communities. Like there's some really, really smart people. And I think Adam Meakin sort of is the sort of the
Mm,
head of the Hydra when it comes to like the physio side and
great
debunking a lot
source
of
of
nonsense.
info, yeah.
Great source of info. And even he's toned down like just the pure irascibility of like some of the people he's gone after.
Yeah.
But I think he shares just so much useful information. And I find surprisingly he's got more nuance than a lot of people give him credit for. I just like his stuff. I've not agreed with everything he's ever said online, but or even his interpretations on some things, but I think he's an amazing resource and I openly endorse him. But
Hmm.
I've also like encountered some people who are sort of part of that community. I've literally blocked on social media because I find their attitudes abhorrent and toxic. And there's certain other people I simply will have nothing to do with because I've observed behavior that I think is just borderline antisocial or status seeking or just like hostile. I'm just like, no, you behaved in a way I'm just not interested in dealing with. So I
Yeah.
discard those people. But I turn around and I don't believe in really discarding most people. But if someone shows you like really like consistent patterns of negative behavior, there are so many great resources out there. We don't need to tolerate. Like, I'm not interested in saying names, but there's an individual who's like supposedly very evidence-based, who's been around for a very long time, who's just got a history of like abhorrent behavior to almost everybody. It's just mean and vicious, and eventually came around
Mm.
at me a while back, and I just told him off and blocked him on everything.
Yeah.
And I do not care that someone else might think, hey, he might be a decent source of info. I'm like, there are a lot of other people who are better or as an equal source of info. Like that level of malicious and malevolence, I'm just not going to even tolerate. But everybody else, I think you can find good in. So
Yeah, I've gotten much more liberal with using the block button on Instagram, and I've also gotten a lot better about just not engaging with people who look like they're making bad faith arguments, and not interested in having like a proper discourse. I'm conscious that you probably have to go in the next minute or two.
I got some wiggle. So you know what? I'm good for 10 more minutes because I totally feel like I've hijacked some of the discussion points because I know
You're
you gave me a bunch of questions. And like if anybody
you're
has
very
got a
okay.
problem,
Don't
there's
worry.
no point in giving me questions because chances are we're going to go down rabbit holes. And this is
Well,
fun. So
I
what else
always
you
just
got?
have a very rough skeleton, as I was saying, but I think we've hit a lot of the things. One thing that I would be interested in, because I know you sort of touched on there, different people on social media who have, grown their profile. I noticed a lot of them kind of like specialize in certain things. Like, say, if you look at Adam Meekins, he obviously specializes in um obviously injury and pain, being a physio, but specifically like combating misinformation, promoting movement optimism. There's people that kind of promote this idea that I suppose to be successful nowadays in a very saturated fitness market, you need to kind of like niche down. And I actually
Mm.
find your content quite interesting. And I noticed from looking at your website as well that you kind of openly say that you are for the general population and that you work with a really
Mm.
wide range of people. So I suppose I wonder, is that something that you think maybe isn't entirely accurate?
I think it's nuanced like anything. So, I mean, first of all, people who tell you need to niche down is usually online business guru type stuff, right?
Yeah, I
It's
get a
like,
lot of those ads, as I'm sure you do.
and yeah, and I think a lot of time it's telling online coaches you need to put something in your bio. It's like, I specialize in training paralegal moms who are between the ages of 39 and 41 with 2.2 children, right? And I think that stuff gets really silly. I think if you're the one choosing your niche, then there's fundamentally a problem with it because you're like going, all right, well, what's something that people don't own?
Yeah.
And then you pick something, right? And I think it's just swampland. It's like, what's the real estate that no one has already like wanted? And every once in a while,
Mm.
someone hits swampland. Like the Liver King is a great example of like extremist swampland that just went super viral because the guy's eating
Yeah.
bull test and not showering for a week and all this other
So he
sort of rubbish.
claims anyway.
I mean, it looks like
Yeah.
an Cressy, Tony Janico, original partner, and then P2P is a business partner. Tony and Pete are great friends of mine. Eric, I've never met, but I know he's by reputation fantastic. And they've
Mm.
really dominated in the space of like major league, minor league baseball pitchers. But I found that my friend Robert Linkle is a resource that I wish more people knew. He's trained in the older adult. The guy's bionic. I mean, the health stuff he's had as a former hammer thrower. I think he's got both hips replaced, like one lung removed, cancer stuff. Like he tells a story about like he's got this older man ask him, well, why are you able to help me? And the guy's like, I basically am you. And it's just like
Hmm.
talks with all of the stuff that's been replaced by Robert. He's just one of the nicest people. I'm a big believer that there's going to be an intersection between the stuff you really find, gain as much experience broadly as possible, the people that you find you really gravitate to and like working with, and the people that seem to also gravitate to you. And if there's something strong there, niche, great.
Yeah.
I also think there are a lot of really effective communicators in the industry who actually still are fairly general. Jordan Syatt is a great example of someone who's general. I think James Smith is
Yeah.
actually quite general. And there are plenty of other people who are able to stay broad, but still are strong in the evidence-based space. So I think that the idea that you have to niche or you have to niche narrow is, as a generalization, I think it's false. I think there's a lot of people that do very well. And I think if you find a great niche, you can be the authority in person in the niche. But even like Adam Meekins, okay, cool. He's a physical therapist. He's evidence-based. He's a very big proponent of strength training. And yes, I like the whole idea of movement optimization. And I actually like that concept
Mm.
where we're getting over this fragility and this fear of moving in any way other than the conventional, hey, here's the stereotypical way that we're supposed to align ourselves for resistance training. I think I'm trying to remember, God, I wish I could remember his name, but Range of Strength. He's here in Eastern Canada. And
Yeah, I don't know his actual name, but yeah, I know who you're
fucking hell
referring
is
to.
his
Yeah.
stuff great, right?
Mm.
You know, his stuff is amazing. But I think it's like anything. If you're going to move in any pattern outside of a traditional whatever, like you got to lift with a rounded back. I mean, the straw man fallacy in this is, well, if someone just goes and like isn't braced and lifts really heavy weight with a rounded back, then are they more likely to hurt themselves? I fucking guarantee it. Anecdotally, from experience, I know they will. How can you get better at lifting with a rounded back? By, which is true of any other situation, you graduate load, intensity, volume of
Mm.
any stimulus on any tissue. If you go in and like try to maximally pull something without bracing your core, and you pull with a really rounded back, your discs and spine just simply haven't been conditioned to be able to do that kind of work. You have to build up to it. I still think bracing, even in a rounded back position, is still a really good idea. You want the
Oh
support of
yeah,
your
yeah.
core, right? I think that's one of the ways that this argument sort of gets like distorted. I think the idea of like Jefferson curls, if you load that appropriately over time, two things are going to happen. One is you'll build up the resilience and the skill. It's also a motor skill issue. You literally have to learn the skill of it. But two, you make yourself more resilient. I mean, this idea that our spines are not designed, the anti-rotation, anti-flexion stuff that got loose probably 15 years ago in the industry probably just
Mm.
took things too far. I mean, if you watch any pro athlete or any athlete in any dimension, there's going to be a lot of flexion rotation under high force.
Sure.
But again, athletes are still building up their tolerance to it over a period of time.
Yeah.
But I mean, and injuries still happen. It's also distinct. Some of the messaging about like, oh, you know, if you suffer an injury, like you made a mistake, you're training, whatever. Guess what? Genetics, just luck, etc. All sorts of circumstances influence the possibility of injuries. And while I think there's a little bit too much celebration of injury in that camp, the optimization camp, I think they take it a bit too far.
The pendulum is swinging a little bit too far to one side now. Yeah.
Yeah, usually the truth is in the middle, right? But I
Yeah.
mean, it used to be the other way where it's like you get all this language, you get practitioners, trainers, you know, someone comes in for some sort of complicated assessment, you tell them how like broken and dysfunctional they are. That's a fucking like fire those people. Like those
Yeah.
people are not helping. They're the problem.
Hmm.
I think I like telling people we are very robust, humans are very resilient, but you know, guess what? Injuries can happen. There's a whole bunch of reasons we can control all of them. Let's work on your sleep quality. Let's make sure we're really hydrated. But load management, and this is something that honestly, most strength conditioning and most physical therapy and most rehabilitation comes down to one concept. Like most, it's not the only thing. It's fucking load management for real.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's appropriate loading on a tissue, and the appropriate like graduation of that and exposure to like ranges of motion. And I don't think we necessarily need to even fear pain. I think we should be careful with pain, but I think at a certain point we also have to learn to tolerate loading appropriately into certain positions that can actually cause discomfort. And one of my favorite framings of this again is muscle doc Jordan Shallow. It's like injury often occurs when force exceeds tissue tolerance.
Hmm.
And while on one hand we want to build the resilience of like improving tissue tolerance, we also have to just be mindful of like, all right, well, what are the forces
Hmm.
that we're applying to this tissue? And sometimes it's okay, maybe body orientation or the way that we're like set up or braced means that a certain tissue is like bearing the brunt of more than it should be. Okay, cool. Let's address that.
Yeah.
Now we're getting a bit complicated. And again, social media doesn't do this stuff very well. But I think if you get really, really good at the idea that humans are very robust, very resilient, make the client in front of you feel very safe and resilient, and then their nervous system's not going to fear and guard and almost like make injuries like happen, like self-fulfilling prophecy,
Hmm.
all while like really being careful with the management of the load, the intensities, graduate them very, very, very slowly. Um, and just make the experience like fun, something that people want to keep coming back to, keep them consistent. They'll build that resilience, they'll build that strength, and then gradually but consistently dose them with more of all these things. And
Yeah.
then just listen when their body just says, okay, cool, I don't like this very much. And
Hmm.
it'll be case by case. Sometimes it's like, okay, cool, we have to pull this back a little bit. Or sometimes it's you have a mutual understanding that, okay, like this actually works. We just have to work through it a little bit. This is nuanced. So I
Yeah.
think
No,
we've
I
got
mean,
to
I think
stop on.
I think if more coaches, physios, etc., just stuck to that basic principle, we'd see much better outcomes for people. Really quick before we finish up, there's two questions I always like to ask guests, well, particularly coaches that I have on the podcast. You can do rapid fire on this if you like.
Yep.
One book you would recommend, doesn't have to be fitness related if you don't want. If it's just a great fiction book or something, that's great. And then anything that you think you've changed your mind on recently. I know it takes a long time for, something to look like a full 180, but if there's anything like that you can think of.
Oh God, I mean, like I love books, so picking one is probably going to be really difficult. It's too much pressure, and I know any book is probably good. You know what? I'm going to throw something unconventional out there. I'm so bullish on the skill of writing as being valuable, email marketing, writing a blog,
Hmm.
social media, etc., that I would recommend anybody read On Writing Well by William Zinsser. I'm going to give people two. There's also a book called Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. Very, very similar conceptually, more references to modern media. So
Okay,
read a
brilliant.
book on writing. You can't audio these. I love audiobooks. Read a physical book. You got to see the words on the page.
Okay.
Okay. What have I changed my mind on? Ah. I honestly, I think the stuff we just talked about, I probably was a bit more rigid. I would never engage in using language that was like based in dysfunction or like fear. But
Yeah.
I've really opened my mind to the robustness, the value in robust movement in a lot of different ways. And like encouraging people to go, okay, cool, this is perfectly fine. And being a little less hyper technical on form from a injury risk standpoint.
Hmm.
Although I still think that, playing within a acceptable range on form still matters for, okay, are we putting tension on the right muscles?
Yeah.
At the same time, this one is sort of like anecdotal, but I can't count the number of times where someone set up in a certain position, usually back not spine, lumbar spine not neutral, not
Hmm.
braced, and they're experiencing some sort of discomfort, and you cue someone to brace their spine, which usually pulls them into a relatively neutral spine, and all of a sudden the discomfort's gone. Now, discomfort does not equate one-to-one to injury, but they're on a scale there. So I actually am of the belief that fundamentally for most things, I still think it's a wise thing to start from a neutral spinal position, but I don't think it has to be always a neutral spinal position. There's another caveat too, and this one is sometimes people pointed out. All the research on lifting with a round back, I don't think any of it's been done in anything heavier than a 12 kilo weight. So
Hmm.
we have an absence of evidence on that one too, right? But I still think fundamentally there's a lot of things in life that we're going to do with, not a perfectly like straight spine. And I think as long as we are careful with how we progress the loading and the intensity and the volume of it, most people can tolerate really well. And the strongest power lifters in the world. I mean, there's also some survivorship bias in that too, but they're evidence
Hmm.
of if you like take scans of their spines, you're going to notice that just the tissue, the bone mineral density of their spines is so fucking insanely strong.
Yeah.
And they're going to be products of like gradual increases in this stuff just over a really long time frame. They're also going to be like naturally super strong people anyway. So, like I said, there is survivorship bias, and I think we always have to acknowledge that as a piece of the equation.
Yeah, and I think we need to be open to the idea that some of the stuff we just don't know. It's more about being open to questioning it and then letting the basic principles guide you. I'm aware because you are in fact somebody who coaches people in the real world that you have a client coming in. So
Yep.
I want to thank you for your time. If people want to find you, where should they go? And is there any kind of services or products they should know about?
Hmm. Okay, so all roads go through my Instagram at Andrew Coates Fitness, and I will respond to any questions you guys have. If you like the podcast, send me a message. Okay, that's number one. Two, if you saw this on my media and you're finding Killian, you're a great resource. I love what you do with your social media.
Thank you.
You've got a growing following. It's more than just the people you could possibly know personally. So I know you're doing that very well. People will learn from you. I hope they check out what else you've done with this podcast. Look at the other guests. Stick around if you like this. Like I've enjoyed you as a host. You're fun. I've done a lot of these. This one I'll remember.
Appreciate it, man.
Um, Anything in terms of products. I mean, like I'm a big believer, and I think trainers is a valuable lesson. I'm a big believer in personal brand development. I'm a big believer in getting in front of more people. I'm a big believer in trying to create a lot of valuable resources. If you really like articles, I have tons of them. Everything's linked on my website, either the stuff I've written for my own website or for the various publications I write for. Message me if you're looking for something specific. I'll see if I have something. I will share other great coaches and resources in the industry because I believe in helping other people. The industry's been very kind to me. We're just about to host, by the time this is aired, it'll probably be over, our conference locally. But I mean, I speak at other events. Like, just keep an eye on my media, and maybe
Hmm.
I'll have an event that I think is an incredible one. Luca hosts of ours Vigor Ground Fitness and Business Summit. He's a good friend of mine. He'll speak at my event. I'm speaking at his. And it's in Seattle. It's October 10th through 12th. That is a crazy event. I went there in 2017 and again in 2021. It's changed my career. It's an honor to go from like total unknown in the audience to the stage, like mind-blowing stuff. So if you're in North America or even further, I really endorse this event. I believe in it to the point where, well, now I get to speak at it. So
Hmm.
that might be one of the best gives, because I think if you go there, I think it'll enrich your experience. You'll meet a ton of people, like-minded coaches. I love traveling these kind of events. For the crowd in the UK, it's a bit of a, or I suppose you have an audience there. It's probably a little bit of a trip for you, but please just reach out and I'll try to do something that gives you something helpful that's nuanced to you based on your questions. And
Hmm.
that's probably the best give I have. Okay.
Okay. And a significant portion of my audience, I think, are metalheads, and that's another reason they should check you out. So
Fuck yeah. So I'm a massive Tool fan. I love
I
Tool. In
can
fact,
see you're wearing a
I've had
shirt
on
now,
my
aren't you?
podcast both Victoria Powell, who used to train Adam Jones, and Sean Madden, who does some Muay Thai work with Maynard. So I've literally I know a couple of their coaches. I love anything that's come out of the Caius realm. Gojira,
Nice.
God,
Oh
was this
yeah.
Olympics epic? Like, wow, that was great. And I just went to see Metallica 2 shows in a row here.
Hmm.
You know what? I like a robust array of music, but I grew up on metal. There's just so much good there. Message me if you love metal. If you like metal and you like evidence-based stuff, my buddy Mike T. Nelson's a fucking metalhead too. He's a smart dude. He's really
Yeah.
cool.
There's a special intersection of nerdy metal people and lifting that
Oh,
I'm a big fan of.
oof.
Andrew, thanks so much for your time today, man. And
Oh, my pleasure. This is a blast.
yeah, and you're always welcome back on if you'd ever like to do this again.
Well, chances are we missed a lot of your questions. So tell you what, if you are interested, just
We'll
hit
circle
me up in a
back.
little bit. I'll come back. We'll do part two. That's an open invitation. I love this stuff. I want to do more podcasts lately anyway.
Awesome.
Thank you.